Migration is nothing short of amazing. Migrating birds can travel thousands of miles to get to their destination. Even more impressive is the fact that young birds can make their very first trip to their winter grounds on their own, even though they've never seen it before. It's thought that migrating birds get compass information from the sun, stars, and landmarks. However, there's more. Researchers discovered that in the beaks of some birds is magnetite, a magnetized rock which may act as a tiny GPS piece, allowing them to know their position relative to Earth's poles. It was also discovered that in bird eyes, specialized cells help them to see the magnetic field. These two attributes certainly come in handy on cloudy days or when traveling over the ocean, which have no landmarks to help orientate them. Birds are made for navigating. But what makes a bird migrate? How do they know when to leave? And will the presence of well-stocked feeders keep them from moving on? In late summer, it's a common sight to see birds like goldfinches, sparrows, robins, and many others grouped up as they feed on the abundance of grass seeds, berries, and the last insects of the year. By the middle of fall, most of these food sources become scarce or frozen under a layer of ice as temperatures plummet. During these times, feeders become highly attractive to birds. Many people love to help their feathered friends. Sometimes they worry, though, that the good hospitality they provide will prevent our little winged wonders from leaving. The thought of birds who should be in warm southern locations being stuck in the cold north during winter is concerning. But there is so much more to why birds migrate than a lack of food. This isn't a thing where they have to make a decision to leave or not. There's no hemming or hawing over it. It is the dip in daylight and temperature, along with less natural food availability and a genetic predisposition, that triggers their urge to migrate. As the days get shorter and the air a little cooler, migratory birds turn restless. Migration is so hardwired in these birds that ones who have been kept in captivity go through a period known as migratory restlessness. During fall and spring, these birds repeatedly flutter to one side of their enclosure. As far as their genes and little brains are concerned, they are in the air migrating. That's how deep-seated this behavior is. So if you haven't realized yet, that means you are not stopping a migrating bird from leaving just because you have feeders up. In fact, it's the opposite. You are helping them. Before birds head south for winter, they need to build enough energy reserves to help sustain them on their long trip. Our resident migrating birds are faced with an arduous journey. Many songbirds actually migrate at night, so you can imagine how exhausted they must get. The extra food you offer in your yard will be much appreciated when they are in the air. There's an important thing to keep in mind, too. Any migrating birds that pass through your area will be stopping by for a couple of days. This is a prime opportunity for them to refuel so they can make the rest of the trip. Imagine how appealing it must be when they see a beautifully clean and full feeder just beaming at them. Not to mention that for you, this means seeing birds you don't normally see. Something else to consider is the fact that there are often stragglers who show up. These birds, for whatever reason, missed the boat and are now trying to get home before winter. Fall feeders help these poor birds who were delayed in leaving get the energy they need. With hummingbirds, for example, it's often recommended to keep your nectar feeder going a few extra weeks after the last hummingbird left, just for this reason. A straggler could show up in much need of fuel. And just think how good that would make you feel, helping a dear little bird in need. There's one really important thing to keep in mind, though. Well, actually a few. First, water. If there aren't any natural sources near your home, offer water in a shallow pan, which can be left on a platform or hung up. Nothing will be more inviting than feeders and water. After all, not all migrating birds stop at feeders, but all of them need water. This could bring species you wouldn't see at your feeders to your yard. Second, keep those feeders clean, at least once a week. Third, offer different varieties of food and feeders. This will help more than one kind of species, plus allow them options, making it even more inviting. Fourth, if there is a disease outbreak reported for your area, it's best to skip the feeders, unfortunately, until you get further notice saying it's good to go. In this situation, it is better for them to seek out natural sources, rather than crowded feeders, which can have a higher risk of transmitting diseases. And finally, it's not just the migrating birds who could use a little help. Your own resident birds who keep you company all winter do too. So while early fall doesn't usually see that many birds to your feeder, keep in mind that our resident birds take note. Places that have feeders will be filed away in their little memory bank. Later on, when natural food isn't as plentiful and things are frozen or covered in snow, they will remember your feeders. With all of this said, there are people who don't have the ability to provide feeders, and it makes them worry. Don't fret though. Although feeders can be helpful to birds, they don't really need it. Birds are very resourceful and know how to find food on their own. When it comes down to it, the only really helpful times to birds are during very bad weather, like droughts or freezing temperatures. Another situation is when a bird shows up in an area they should not be, like this Oriole who landed at my feeders in the middle of December. We don't have Orioles here, period, let alone in winter. Sometimes this happens with other birds too, like hummingbirds. As we know, most hummingbirds, with the exception of Anna's, should be miles away in Mexico or South America. In a case like this, I would go completely out of my way to help that bird. Which is exactly what I did with the Oriole, providing her with crushed peanuts and seeds, crumbled suet, and grape jelly. You can learn about the whole experience and everything I did in the video on the screen now. You never know, it might come in handy for you one day. Thanks for watching. Happy birding. Lastly, I crumbled up some room temperature suet to help her build fat reserves so she could keep warm. The next morning I found her in the dome feeder inside the box eating her clementine. Wasn't long before she got really upset and tried to grab